Thanks for joining Precious Sermons Recap. This is a channel dedicated to the pursuit of God. Like most of the world, the responsibilities of day-to-day life takes up most of our time, so we recap a host of religious theologies with the hope this educational and spiritual journey leads us to God. Thank you to our sponsor Life American Made. Let's begin. Pastor Tyson Coughlin highlights grace and redemption within the story of the Samaritan woman's encounter with Jesus. Pastor Tyson starts out by reading John chapter 4 verses 5 to 10, and identifies a theologically profound statement. For the simplicity of the statement, most people overlook it. Jesus looked at the woman at the well and said, "Please give me a drink." It needs to be understood that Jesus is the preeminent God of all creation. All things were created through him and by him. Because Jesus is the physical image of the invisible God, he is almighty. While at the well, he looks at a woman who is a part of an outcast Samaritan tribe and a woman sinner. Who are we? That we may be in the position to bless or help the Creator. David said in Psalms 8, "Who am I that you would even be mindful of my existence, as you are the architect of the universe?" It is clear that Jesus didn't need anything from the Samaritan woman. Jesus has proven through past miracles that he has the power to provide any solution. However, the pastor makes a case that Jesus wanted something from her. Jesus didn't want her water, he wanted her worship. Psalms chapter 42 describes the Spirit of God is to be poured out. Acts chapter 2 verse 17 says, "In the last days God will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh." In both cases, the reference of water was used. He was asking her for worship, for the Samaritan woman to pour out onto him. With this understanding, we can now take away the implication that even one sinner can quench God's desire. There is another aspect of the story that needs to be expounded upon, but this can only be accomplished by understanding who the Samaritans were. The Samaritans are former Jews from the northern kingdom of Israel that were outcast due to their relinquishing of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They married heathens and pagans while adopting new idol gods. For these reasons, Jews did not even speak to Samaritans. Jesus, for the first time within the text, blatantly announces himself as the Messiah. Up until this point, others have called Jesus the Messiah. So why did Jesus reveal himself to a Samaritan woman? This action declares that the God of all creation draws near to us even in our sinful state. He is asking you for your worship. Will you give me a drink? Will you pour out your praise? These actions should not be perceived as egotistical, or demand praise. Looking over the entire Bible, God is not a God that takes but gives. John 3:16 declares that God gave his only begotten Son, so that whoever believes in him will have everlasting life. The miracle of worship is not God invites us to worship, but that God accepts our praise. To be clear, he doesn't need anything from us, but he's willing to accept our worship. The back and forth interaction during John chapter 4 verse 10 to 14 leads to more revelations. In the prior verse, Jesus was asking her for a drink. However, at the beginning of this verse, Jesus is offering her an eternal fountain that will never run dry. God is not about taking but is about the exchange. And in this exchange, he is offering something infinite for something limited and finite. Pastor Tyson links this principle to Isaiah 61 verse 3, "To anoint unto them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oils of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they may be called trees of righteousness." So God is inviting us to worship him. Bring him what you have, and he will do something extraordinary with it. An example of this is the retelling of the feeding of the 5,000. God took the limited resources of the 2 fish and 5 loaves, and turned it into a feast for 5,000 after it was surrendered to God. Worshipping the true God does not just satisfy God, it also positively changes a person. Jeremiah chapter 2 verse 5 stresses this concept. "What did your ancestors find wrong with me, that led them to stray so far from me? They worship worthless idols, only to become worthless themselves." This proves that something happens when you worship, so it's important to worship correctly, as you become what you worship. This does not mean your circumstance would change, it just means that something within you does. Lastly, and most importantly, there is one more lesson to be learned from the Samaritan woman and Jesus. Numbers chapter 5 verse 16 explains how to treat a woman who was accused of adultery. The priest will then present her to stand trial before the Lord. He will take some holy water in a clay jar and pour into it dust he has taken from the tabernacle floor. When the priest has presented the woman before the Lord, he must unbind her hair and place in her hands the offering of proof. The jealousy offering determines whether her husband's suspicions are justified. The priest will stand before her holding the jar of bitter water that brings a curse to those who are guilty. If she was guilty, she would become barren and will not be able to produce children, but if she was innocent, the curse will not affect her. The woman at the well was an adulterer 5 times over. Jesus, our high priest, does not make her take the bitter water as in the Old Covenant, but instead asks the Samaritan woman specifically for her water. In John chapter 19, 28-30, Jesus knew that his mission was now finished, and to fulfill scripture he said, "I am thirsty." A jar of sour wine was sitting there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put it on a hyssop branch, and held it up to his lips. When Jesus had tasted it, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Pastor Tyson's concluding point is that on the cross Jesus drank our curse. Thanks for listening to our sermon recap. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. If there is a particular theological recap you think is worth sharing with the world, you can submit a request at precioussermonrecap.com. If you're fortunate enough to be in the position to support, visit our Patreon account or watch the ad at the end of the video. Thanks again to Life American Made and our viewership for supporting the collective's journey.